Hi, everyone. I'm really excited to welcome you to the New England Centenarian Study webinar. Thank you for joining us today, where we have a great lineup for you to tell you a little bit about what we've been working on, some tips for healthy aging, and then we're really excited to be able to answer some of your questions. I ask that if you have any questions that you haven't already emailed to us, please go ahead and put those into the Q&A box usually at the bottom of your screen. Please don't use the chat. Instead, use the Q&A box, and we will have time for that at the end. So first, you'll be hearing from Dr. Thomas Pearls, the founder and director of the New England Centenarian Study, and he will be talking about healthy versus exceptional aging and how much of it is due to your genes. And then I'm excited to talk to you a bit about how we are trying to detect changes in cognitive function as early as possible to measure cognitive change and to help find causes and treatment. And then I'm excited to introduce Dr. Vanetta Dotson, who will be giving you great lifestyle strategies for lifelong brain health. That's probably the number one question that people ask us about. And then later, when we get to the Q&A section, we'll have two more panelists joining us. Dr. Paola Sebastiani, who has been working with our study for many years. She's a biostatistician and professor of statistics at Tufts University. And we will also have Dr. Sophia Millman, who runs the Albert Einstein site of our studies. From here, I welcome you once again, and I would like to pass it off to Dr. Tom Pearls.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you, Stacy. I apologize to everyone that I have a bad cold, so you'll have to deal with my sultry voice and perhaps a sneeze every now and then. We'll see how it goes. May I have the next slide, please, Brad? So there has been some news lately in the press about the role of genes in longevity, and I thought it was very timely for me to talk a bit about that. So you'll see me presenting some information about that, and really kind of distinguishing what is aging versus healthy aging versus becoming a centenarian in terms of the underlying factors. And I'll try and also tie in for those of you who are participants in the study, how some of the things that the questionnaires and other data that we collect from you help us understand this. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about average life expectancy, what age are we generally built for, the role of healthy behaviors. I'm going to not talk too much about healthy behaviors that impact upon brain health. That's going to be Dr. Vanetta Dotson's talk. And then the role of genes in healthy aging and in centenarians. And some other clues about determinants of exceptional longevity beyond genes. Okay, next slide. This slide shows you what's happened with average life expectancy since the turn of the last century, where up until about 1890 or so, 1880, average life expectancy was only 40 years. That's not to say there weren't people living to a much older age, but the average was pulled down so much by such high infant and baby mortality, where people could count on losing, unfortunately, about a quarter of their children to waterborne illnesses and other things that are part of public health. And then at the turn of the century or so, we had some really major improvements in public health, so that by the time, and in 1912 or so, we went from an average years of education of 8 to 12. Those more years of education play a big role in people making good decisions about their health. It also means much better socioeconomics for the country, and with that is more public health and what have you. Again, I apologize for my voice. I hope it's not distracting you too much. From the 1920s until about 1960, when I was born, average life expectancy really took off. So in 1960, average life expectancy was about 70 years. And since then, it's kind of tapered since we've been making fewer and fewer major dents in what's possible to improve average life expectancy. But things like not smoking, better treatment of high blood pressure, detection and treatment of high blood pressure, vaccines, a whole range of things have continued to make average life expectancy now almost around 80, which is pretty remarkable. Next slide. This is just to show you that we differ in average life expectancies across the United States, where the blue and dark blue are, and in Canada as well, are pretty high average life expectancies, and then yellow, orange, and dark red are not so great. And that's tied to probably mostly difference in socioeconomic status in some states versus others. And then and with that, some public health programs and so on that help the average life expectancy be better in some states versus others. Off to the right, I mentioned that there are some places in the United States and Canada that are spectacular. There's an area within Toronto where average life expectancy is almost 87 years. And in Back Bay, very close to where we work here at the medical campus for Boston University, they have an average life expectancy of 93 years. And again, I think for those places, we're talking high levels of education, lots of programs that help people with health-related and other social perks. There's also a higher socioeconomic status, and with that, probably less social stress, access to better food, more time for exercise, and so on. I'm going to get actually into health habits that have been shown to actually get most people to 93. Next slide. So there was a study, excuse me, from the Nurses' Health Study and Health Professional Study of 120,000 individuals, and they looked at 5 habits, excuse me. They looked at healthy diet, and here I give some examples of what a healthy and unhealthy diet would be. Healthy would be vegetables, fruits, nuts, whole grains, healthy fats, omega-3 fatty acids. And those are things that you can get in fish, for example, but also as a supplement that you buy in the store. And then unhealthy foods would be things like red meat, processed meats, sugar-sweetened beverages, refined grains, trans fats, and excess salt. And then healthy physical activity, which I would say is 30 minutes per day of moderate to vigorous heart-raising activity. 3 would be a healthy body weight, which is a body mass index of between 18.5 and 25. You can go on the internet, put in body mass index calculator, and then put in your weight and your height, and it'll tell you what your body mass index is. That people have never smoked. And then I think very controversially for me as a geriatrician, moderate alcohol intake has been associated with higher years of education, of life expectancy. For older people, especially those who may have a little bit of cognitive impairment. I think any alcohol is really bad for you. It's a toxin for the brain, as far as I'm concerned. I, or my beliefs and what I've seen in the studies, be that it is as it may, this study thought that it was a healthy habit. Okay, next slide. This is to remind me that many of you have been so kind to go and answer a pretty long questionnaire about your diet. It's the Harvard Food Frequency Questionnaire, and I know that this takes time and patience, but it's really important for us with our study that we get an idea of what everyone's diet is, in part because people are going to have certain genetic variants that make some parts of a diet, like having these essential amino acids or a certain amount of protein in your diet, that really take advantage of that gene to give you longer life expectancy. We're always trying to understand interactions between your genes and your environment and your habits. And having this information is very, very valuable. The other place where this is valuable is where we collect a stool sample from you and us understanding what kind of bacteria, which bacteria species are in your gut. And some bacteria produce very healthy substances that get into your bloodstream and even get into your brain and are very good for you. And much of that may rely upon the diet. So us understanding what you're eating is really, really helpful to us. So that, along with all the other questionnaires that we ask of you to take, we're so thankful. Next slide. So this is showing, remember those 5 healthy habits. What happens if a woman and a man, so it's women on the left and men on the right, what happens if you have none, 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 of those habits at the age of 50? If you have none of those habits, you would be expected as a woman to live an additional 29 years to the age of 79. But if you have all 5 habits, you would live to the age of 93. And for men, and men live a little less long, if you have none of those habits, you would live 50 plus 25.5 years, or just 75.5 years. But if you have all 5 of those habits, you would live to almost 88 years. I was really quite surprised by these data. You know, it's for women, that's 33 years beyond the age of 60. That's a third of a person's lifetime, where your health habits really make a huge difference. And I think this is average aging. This is what the average person is capable of achieving. They can either squander that gift by having these poor habits, or they can take advantage of that gift by doing these behaviors. The other thing I would say is, if you're adding years to your life because of healthy habits, then you're not going to be, then the years that you're adding are healthy years. And so it means not only improving your life expectancy, but also expanding your health span, or the period of time of your life that's spent in good health. So there's huge payoff with this. Next slide. So recently, this year, there was an article that appeared in Science that got a lot of press, indicating in the past people thought that about 25% of longevity or lifespan was due to just what was genetic, and the remaining 75% was your health habits. And I would still say for average life expectancy, because those health habits are making such a huge difference, that's about right. But if you want to live to significantly long, well, not if you want to, I think most people would like to live to older age as long as they have their health. But if the aspiration is to live to 100 or even older, this article said that to get into probably your early 90s, it's more like 50% is genetic. And then they actually analyzed data from our study, the New England Centenarian study, and data that we have about the brothers and sisters of our centenarians and how old they lived to be. And they felt that about 61% of getting to 100 is genetic. Next slide. So we've actually, in our own study, have known this for quite some time and had published results indicating that the part of life expectancy that's explained by your genes is actually quite high for getting to 100, but gets even higher with even older age. It's just that we didn't get enough press. And we had some hints pretty early on in the study that there was an important genetic component, or at least familial component, in that we first found some families with really impressive clustering for extreme longevity, where we would find a centenarian with multiple brothers and sisters also getting to 100 or older. We also looked at the brothers and sisters of centenarians and calculated what the chances were for them to get to 100, and that's called a sibling relative risk, and that was quite high. And then the other interesting thing is we studied people who get to very even older ages, people called semi-supercentenarians who live from 105 to 109, and those who even get to 110 and older. And we found that the role of genetics gets stronger and stronger, where it might be 60% for getting to 100, but it's more like 75% for getting to 105 and older. We've also noted that it's not just one powerful gene you have to inherit, but it's many, many genes. And that's because aging's really complicated. It's got a lot of different biological mechanisms that are breaking down and that turns into aging. But there's a lot of mechanisms to fight that and to give you resilience. But it's for these different mechanisms, and there's a bunch of genes governing each one of those mechanisms. So it's going to be many genes. Each gene has a tiny effect, but getting the right combination, kind of like getting the right numbers of a lottery, that's really hard to do. But when you get them, it's a big payoff. If you get all, say, 120 genes that are conducive to longevity, that's a big payoff. And the other thing is that we think the vast majority of those genes, what they're doing is they're protecting you. They are conferring resilience against aging and aging-related diseases. So if we can discover those genes and the biological mechanisms that protect you, maybe we can find drugs that do the same thing. So that combination of genes is called genetic signatures. Next slide. So again, and this is one of our sibling pairs in the study. There's many different genes involved with individually weak effects, but the right combination can have a very strong effect, and many of them protect you. Next slide. And just to tell you again and remind you, um, centenarians are about 1 per 3,000 in the population. There's about 80,000 centenarians in the United States. Um, then there's a huge drop off where 105-year-olds are much, much rarer, about 1 per 200,000 in the population. And then the super centenarians are 1 per 6 million. There's about 50 to 60 super centenarians in the United States any one time. And the reason they're more and more rare is because probably the genetic signatures that are necessary to get to these more and more rare ages are also more and more rare. Next slide. Okay, I'm done with our talk. Any questions that come up, please put them in the Q&As, and we'll try and answer those at the end of the talk. Stacy.
Great. Thank you so much for that great information about genetics and also some other behaviors that can help you get to very old ages. I am very excited, one, to be here. I joined the study back in 2000, so I've been working with some of you for over 20 years, and there's so much value in the longitudinal piece of our study. So I really want to thank everyone who's been in the study for many years and hopefully will be for many more. It's really wonderful. But I'm going to tell you a little bit today. While I've been working with the study, I went on to get my PhD in behavioral neuroscience because I'm very interested in understanding very subtle behaviors that might be very early indicators of who will go on to have cognitive impairment. And the idea of being able to identify the earliest behaviors that signal cognitive impairment will help us find causes of cognitive impairment, and also potentially those would lead to treatments. Next. And so one of the very novel ways, so you probably all of you who have done the video visits that we do or other cognitive testing that we do by phone, you're a bit more familiar with the tasks that we ask you to do, remembering a list of words or drawing certain things. But what we've also implemented over the past actually 10 years now is we now collect a digital layer of data collection. And we do this by voice recording all of your responses. So on the bottom picture, that is a digital voice recorder. It's actually pretty high tech. Um, and then on the top picture, that is a digital pen. And it looks and writes just like a regular ballpoint pen, but it actually has a little camera aimed at the tip of the pen that it can track the pen's movement across paper. And what we're trying to figure out now are what are very um, subtle aspects of how you write and draw and speak your answers to these cognitive tests that might even tell us earlier signs of cognitive impairment. So I'm going to tell you a little bit more about how we're doing that. Next. And so, for example, if we ask someone to draw a tree like this picture here, there are many ways that they could go about it. So we ask everyone to use a digital pen whenever we have you write or draw anything. And when we download the data from this pen, it creates a file with a log of all these data points as the pen moves across the paper. And we can take all of those data points and start to extract different pieces of the drawing. So we can specifically look at how much time you spend writing or drawing. And that's probably more related to motor function. So how quickly you're drawing, how you hold the pen, how much pressure you put on the pen. And we can quantify the amount of writing time. But then there are also some times that you might be holding the pen and thinking about how you want to draw the tree. What piece do you want to draw next? And that's what we call thinking time because you're not actively drawing. That's more of a cognitive processing piece of the task. And to be able to separate out writing time from thinking time now gives us more information than just whether or not you were able to draw the tree. We can look at how you did it. And then we can also look at different pieces of the drawing. For example, if we wanted to know how long it took you to draw the trunk of the tree, if we thought that would be meaningful, we could specifically look at that. Or we could look at how the speed of your drawing changes over time. And we've done some work, not on for drawing a tree, but some of the other tasks that you've done. One where we have you pair numbers and symbols, and we can look at um, whether you speed up in the writing or speed up in the thinking time over the course of the test, even though it's only 90 seconds. And we're seeing some patterns that are meaningful. So some people who get slower as they write, they get more fatigued. That seems to be an indicator that they might go on to have cognitive impairment. And so we're studying these more in depth now. I've actually put together a group of researchers who are all interested in using digital data to identify biomarkers of cognition. And we're trying to figure out other ways beyond just writing time and thinking time. What are some other things that we could look at from this digital pen data that might be early markers of different types of cognitive changes? The Framingham Heart Study actually zoomed into some of the drawings that they have. And with the digital data, you can actually pick up very subtle tremor that a clinician wouldn't even be able to notice. But by analyzing the digital data, you can see it in the drawings. So these are really powerful data. And if you go next. And then in regard to the voice recordings, there are many different aspects of speech, many that I did not know about before embarking on this project. But there's so much rich data in how someone gives a response to a test. So, for example, one of the commonly used tests in neuropsych testing is that we will say a series of numbers to you, such as 5, 9, 6, 3, and then ask you to say them back to us. And one person might say 5, 9, 6, 3, and the other person might say 5, 9, 6, 3. And although they're both correct, they sound very different. And if you just score the answer as right or wrong, you might miss those subtleties. And so, but it can be very difficult for a clinician or a researcher to, capture that very subtle qualitative difference in the response. So what the voice recorder allows us to do is capture that at a level a person never could. And we can look at what are called lexical features. So, which actual words are you using on tests that require worded responses? Are you using filler words like or What kind of sentence structure are you using if you're recalling a story, for example? We can look at acoustic metrics, so things like the volume of your voice, the frequency, and the pitch. And we can look at temporal aspects as well, so things like the rhythm of how you say a sentence and whether you're hesitating in your responses, such as in those number sequences. So again, we're trying to understand what are meaningful changes even in voice responses that could tell us that someone is on a different trajectory, and maybe could benefit from interventions much earlier in the course, well before someone even starts scoring poorly on a test. So that's just in a nutshell, a little bit about what we're doing with the digital data that we collect. If you go next. I am going to pass it off to Dr. Vanetta Dotson, who is a clinical neuropsychologist, and she is actually the lead of our newest study site at Georgia State University. So we're very excited to have her here today.
Thanks. I'm very excited to be here and to talk to you all about what you can do to have the healthiest brain possible as you age. A lot of it ties in well with what you've already been hearing about some of the factors that promote longevity, but I'm going to take a brain health perspective in talking about these things. We can move on to the next slide. So, first of all, what does it mean to have a healthy brain? What does that mean for your life? When your brain is healthy, it has lots of positive benefits because the brain is really the basis of everything that you do. So, when your brain is healthier, we have better memory and cognitive skills. As we age, we have a lower risk for Alzheimer's disease and other types of dementia. And there are mood benefits as well. So, people who have a healthier brain have overall better mood and a sense of well-being. And really important when it comes to mental health is that there's a lower risk for disorders like depression and anxiety when the brain is healthy, because ultimately mental health conditions are brain health conditions. It's due to changes in the brain that can lead to these different types of symptoms. Also, the brain is important for physical functioning. So when you have a healthy brain, your physical performance is better. And what is really important for people to think about as they're aging is that the ability to keep your functional independence, being able to manage your own finances, drive, manage your medications, your healthcare decisions, all of that independence that everyone wants to hold on to, you're more likely to have that when your brain is healthy. So basically, a healthy brain affects all aspects of life. And so that's kind of my commercial for saying this is really important to think about what can you do to improve and maintain your brain health. Next. So there are certain pillars of brain health that experts agree on, and this includes World Health Organization, the CDC, Alzheimer's Association, American Heart Association, all kind of converge on certain key themes. And we're going to go over those somewhat briefly. I'm going to try not to go too fast because I talk fast and there's a lot to say, but I will give you at least an overview and then take your questions along the way or at the end. So these are the things I'm going to get into today. Physical activity, so get moving. You want to eat well. You want to sleep well. You want to be socially connected, keep your brain engaged, and then have that overall health and wellness when it comes to physical and mental health. So we'll get into each of those for just a few minutes. Next slide. So my favorite thing to talk about is exercise, because if there's one thing you want to do to have a healthy brain, exercise is probably that one thing. Now, having said that, don't do one thing, do lots of things. All of the things I'm going to talk about are important, but there's just so many benefits of exercise, not just for what we normally think of in terms of physical health, and having stronger muscles, having a stronger heart. Those things are all important, but there's also really powerful effects of exercise on the brain itself. So let's go into a few of those things. So one is that there's this improvement in what we call the structure of the brain. This has to do with the size of the brain or the health of the brain cells. And what we see is that people who exercise regularly, people who are physically fit, can see different changes that are positive for the brain and for cognitive functioning and mood. One is that exercise promotes the growth of new brain cells or nerve cells. So we call this neurogenesis when you're able to generate new neurons or brain cells. And so exercise promotes that process. We also see that exercise can lead to an increase in the volume or the size of particular regions of the brain, particularly in the frontal lobes, which is the part of the brain that's really important for things like complex problem solving, multitasking, inhibition, the kinds of really kind of higher level skills that are really important for functional independence. And exercise can help to increase volume in those areas. And we see from the research that also translates to better performance on cognitive tests that measure those types of skills. So it's not just bigger, it's actually functioning better. Exercise also really, I think, in an interesting way, can help to decrease pathology that causes Alzheimer's disease. So we know that Alzheimer's disease is really closely linked to these plaques and tangles in the brain that you've probably heard about before. And what we see is that people who start an exercise program in clinical trials, you can do pre and post scans to look at, or other measures to look at Alzheimer's pathology, and you actually see a decrease in those pathological changes in the brain that cause Alzheimer's disease. We also see that people who've been more physically fit throughout their life have a lower risk for developing dementia. So there's this long-term effect of starting early and having a lower risk, but then you also get a benefit if you start exercising later. And I wanted to make sure and bring this up because for all the things we're going to talk about today, what you do throughout your life matters. Brain health is a lifelong process. So what happens when you're literally conceived in the womb, when you're a baby, all that matters throughout your life. But that doesn't mean that there's ever a time that's too late to start. Because if you start in your 60s, 70s, 80s, any age, you still get benefits. So I always say the time is now, and I say that regardless of your age, regardless of your health. Okay, so moving on, we also see that exercise is beneficial when it comes to the functioning of the brain. So in terms of the brain's being able to operate the way that it should during different tasks, that is improved by exercise. When it comes to communication between brain cells and when it comes to connections between them, which we need for efficient processing and efficient sort of thinking and memory, that also gets improved. And then we know that there's this vascular benefit when it comes to heart health, when it comes to exercise, but we also see that in the brain, that there's this improvement in blood flow and the health of arteries in the brain in the same way that we see it in the heart and the rest of the body. So lots of benefits. I don't have a slide on here, but also there's chemical changes that happen with exercise that are beneficial so that we have a boost in these chemicals that help to promote good mood and cognitive functioning and a decrease in chemicals that are associated with stress and other sort of negative outcomes. Okay, next. So all of the things that I mentioned do translate to very real benefits, really across the lifespan, but focusing a little bit on what happens in older adults. You can see both immediate and long-term benefits for memory and cognitive functioning. So when I say immediate, what I mean is that research shows that you can have a single bout of exercise. Let's say you spend half an hour riding a bike or doing some other kind of exercise. If someone were to do testing, let's say processing speed or thinking speed testing before and after you had that bout of exercise, you're going to probably do better after you had that bout of exercise. So there's this short-term effect of boosting things like attention and thinking speed from a single exercise session. Now, that doesn't mean it lasts forever. It doesn't mean that you have one session and then you're good to go for the rest of your life. It means that for a couple of hours after exercising, you can see some benefits, but that's going to wear off if it's just one session. However, if you regularly exercise, if you stay physically active, then you can start to see those longer term benefits, those more stable benefits that you have overall. You function better when it comes to your memory and your cognitive skills, and that's longer lasting benefits. So both immediate and long-term benefits. And so as we age, what we see is that studies show that people who stay physically active have less age-related decline in their memory and their cognitive functioning in general. So you can have this kind of protective effect when it comes to brain health when people are being physically active. When it comes to the brain itself, we actually see that there can be this preservation that I mentioned, but even reversal of changes in brain structure and function. So as we get older, it's natural for there to be changes in the size of different parts of our brain, in how the brain functions. But people who are more physically fit have less of those age-related changes than people who are inactive throughout their life. I already mentioned that you can have this reduction in Alzheimer's pathology in the brain. And then when it comes to mood, what we see is that, again, exercise can improve overall feelings of well-being and can also prevent or treat depression. I should mention that for mood, there's also that short-term benefit where after a single bout of exercise, people tend to report more positive emotions and less negative emotions like stress and anger. Next slide. So I'm going to go through the other brain healthy behavior a little bit more quickly. My favorite is exercise, so I always give it more time than the others, but I do want to make sure we have plenty of time for questions. So another pillar of brain health is cognitive engagement or cognitive stimulation. So this is basically saying use it or lose it. You want to stay mentally active throughout your life. And we see that there are, again, these benefits across the lifespan when it comes to cognitive stimulation. So early in life, people who have more sort of enriched education, or people who have early on in life mentally stimulating jobs, we see that there's this benefit when it comes to how much their brain changes when they get older, how much their cognitive and memory skills decline when they get older. But also, as you go throughout life, middle age, late life, number one, the job kind of situation is still important, where people who have more complex jobs that require them to do problem solving, learning new things, having some degree of flexibility, those type of jobs tend to be associated with better brain health. That doesn't mean that you're not getting any benefit at all from other jobs. For example, if your job is very physical, then you can get some of that benefits of physical activity from the job. If your job has you around a lot of people and being social, we'll talk about in a few moments how social engagement is important. So there's various ways that your job can be sort of protective throughout your life. And then aside from your job, we also know that hobbies matter a lot. So whatever age you are, you can be a child, an adult, an older adult, that having mentally engaging hobbies can protect your brain health. And so by mentally engaging, things that require you to do something novel, learn something new, engage your brain. So what we know is that when you have that kind of combination of something that challenges you, that again is new and engaging and fun because you stick with it, that we see these benefits. And that's true whether or not you have cognitive impairment. So people who already have some cognitive impairment can still do things. Let me give some examples. So this can range from things that you think of right away, like doing puzzles, reading, but even things like going to museums or doing artwork. Anything that just requires you to kind of take in some new information and do something different with it are all things that are going to be good for your brain. So I love this one because I feel like it's not as hard to ask people to go and do things that are fun that keep their mind active, because a lot of it are things that we would want to do anyway. So for me, I think about things like I love going to museums, I love going to shows, I love traveling. Traveling brings mental stimulation. All of those things are helpful. So people tend to want to do this one more so than like the exercise and the nutrition piece. They're all important, but this one can be maybe for some people the most fun way of trying to boost their brain health. Next, please. Okay, so I already mentioned the social piece. And so this again is another way that you can have fun while you're improving your brain health. Being socially engaged is really important when it comes to the health of your brain. Number one, we know that there's a sense of well-being that comes with being social. And I think all of us experienced during the COVID pandemic how hard it was to be isolated and to have that feeling of disconnection from people. And so we saw the negative effect. So both things are true. So it goes in both directions, that being lonely or isolated is most definitely associated with, of course, changes in our mood, but also changes in brain health. I kind of skipped down to the bottom here, but loneliness is associated with these different changes in the brain, including more of that buildup of Alzheimer's pathology. But the opposite is true, that the more you're socially engaged and feel socially connected, the more of a benefit you get for brain health. One thing I want to mention here is that there's an important sort of comparison between the social engagement that you want versus social engagement that you have. And that's really what the key is. So what I mean by that, there are some people who don't necessarily need to have a big social circle, don't need to constantly be around people. And so they might want to have a smaller social network of just a few close people. And so if that's what they want and they have that, then you see that kind of preservation or that protection for brain health. Other people might really want a larger social network. And so they could have the same number of friends or network people in their network as the first person, but they feel dissatisfied. So it's that dissatisfaction, that feeling of being lonely or feeling disconnected that is more important than an objective number. So there's no magic number of people that you should have in your network. The question is, do you feel satisfied with your social network? If you are, then that's going to probably be good for your brain health. If you're not, then that's an incentive to try to work on that because you can better protect your brain if you have social networks that match with what your desire is. So that's basically taking into account our personalities. Everyone is a little bit different. I often tell the same story when I give talks on this topic about how during the pandemic, I was having like a Zoom catch up with one of my best friends, who's also a neuropsychologist actually, and I was telling her, "This is so hard for me. I'm so disconnected. I hate it that I never get to see people." At that point, it had been maybe 1 or 2 months into it, and I was already just clawing at the walls because I'm very social. Whereas my friend says, "What are you talking about? The best thing about this pandemic is I don't have to see people." And I just thought that was really funny and very sort of telling about how different we are when it comes to personality. For me, it was really difficult to be that isolated. For her, it gave her sort of an escape to not have to be as social. So that's just an example of how the social connection you want is really the most important piece when it comes to brain health. Next. Okay, so nutrition, I'm going to mention sort of briefly because you already heard about this when it comes to longevity. It also applies to brain health. And in particular, when we think about nutrition for brain health, we know that heart healthy diets are the ones that seem to be the most beneficial. So you've probably heard, I think everyone has, about the Mediterranean style diet. I always refer to it as the Mediterranean style diet and not the Mediterranean diet to emphasize that it is an overall pattern of eating and pattern of what you kind of eat more and less of that can be applied to different types of cuisine. And I think that's really important because people from different backgrounds, different cultures have certain foods that they're used to eating. And sometimes I've gotten the kind of response from my patients that they're thinking that they have to really truly eat food that's from like the Mediterranean area. And I'm saying, no, 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 you're trying to just have the general principles. So having lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, the things that you heard about from Dr. Pearls, and then minimizing things like red meat, saturated fats, ultra processed foods, etc. So you can apply those principles to the food that you like to eat. And you don't have to necessarily assume that it has to be only certain ingredients that you're using, only a certain style of food. So those types of diets, Mediterranean style diets, are considered to be heart healthy. They're also brain healthy. So in general, when it comes to nutrition, heart healthy diets are going to be the best way to go. Next. So let's talk a little bit about sleep. Sleep is really important for the functioning of our entire body, and that includes the brain. So we know that sleep, unfortunately, is a challenge for a lot of people, whether it be the busy professors or it be because of just family demands or anything else that's going on in your life. But really prioritizing sleep is one of the best things that you can also do for your brain. So we know that when people chronically have poor sleep, they can start to have changes in their brain. That includes changes in the structure of the brain, so the volume of the brain itself, as well as how the brain functions, and then, of course, cognitive functioning. So people tend to ask, okay, so what does it mean to have sleep problems? For some people, it's just having chronic insomnia that may be diagnosable and may require some treatment from a doctor. For some people, it's just chronically just not getting a lot of sleep because life is busy or whatever it is. But what we see is that there seems to be a sweet spot when it comes to sleep, that getting on average about 7 to 8 hours per night seems to be associated with the best brain health. Having much less or much more of that is associated with worse cognitive functioning. So there's this kind of sort of bell shape or a kind of function when it comes to sleep, that there is a point where too much is also not necessarily associated with better functioning. So you want to have that sweet spot in the middle. So, one reason for this being so important is that sleep is a time where our body really clears out toxins and it clears out toxins in our brain. There was a really interesting study that was done a few years ago where they were able to show that during sleep, the cerebral spinal fluid, which is that fluid that cushions the brain and it helps to kind of clean toxins from the brain, the cerebral spinal fluid washes over the brain in like a wave-like pattern during sleep. And then it takes with it these different toxins. And that includes the toxins that can ultimately build up to cause the plaques and tangles that lead to Alzheimer's disease. So when we think about how people who have chronically poor sleep have a higher risk for different types of dementia, including Alzheimer's disease, at least part of that could be because of the fact that there's not that opportunity for the brain to kind of basically go through a rinse cycle, is how I like to put it. So we definitely want to make sure that you're having enough sleep to be able to protect your brain. And then mental health is part of brain health. And so we know that sleep has a bidirectional relationship with mental health. And by that, I mean that having poor sleep can start to lead to problems with mood, problems with anxiety, but also people who have a mental health condition like depression or anxiety can also start to have sleep problems. So it can go in both directions. So, as I've been talking, you've had a chance to look at this little diagram here that just gives you a little bit of a breakdown of the types of things that are helpful for sleep. So, I don't want to just say that there's a problem, but also give you some possible ways to try to address sleep if that is an issue. Again, keeping in mind that if you have really chronically poor sleep problems, you might want to talk to your doctor. There are treatments, including certain types of psychotherapy that can help for sleep problems as well as, of course, other medical interventions. So, but as far as things that you can do at home to try to maximize your sleep, there are things that we call sleep hygiene, and this table here summarizes some of the things that you want to look out for when it comes to getting the best sleep. I do want to emphasize one thing in particular, which is trying to avoid basically blue light at night. So blue light's going to be what's coming from TV, from cell phones, from your iPad or other tablet. So that blue light can really interfere with sleep, and so taking some time to disconnect from electronics is really important for trying to get to sleep. And then practicing things like deep breathing, mindfulness throughout the day, and including at night can also be helpful for sleep. So, okay, next slide. So then the last thing I wanted to mention is when it comes to physical and mental health. So again, I consider mental health to be part of brain health because mental health is all based on brain disorders. But I did want to kind of mention specifically mental health here. So first, let me say that it's important to take care of all aspects of your health and to keep up with your medical care. So if you have recommendations from your doctor, making sure to follow them, making sure to take all your medications as prescribed, making sure to be proactive and to say something if you have concerns. Depending on where you live or how comfortable you feel with your doctors that you see, you may or may not feel comfortable bringing up small concerns. You might dismiss them and say, "Oh, it's probably not a big deal." It's better to ask because sometimes having that early detection of a problem and being able to do something about it early on can really change the course of how your health goes. Because for some conditions, the more it progresses, the harder it is to treat. So if you have any kind of concern, notice any kind of changes when it comes to your physical health, then you want to say something. And the same thing is true for mental health. We want to treat physical health and mental health as just as important because they are just as important. So if you're noticing changes in your mood, if you're noticing that you're feeling anxious, if you're noticing any kind of weird thoughts, anything like that, it's better to talk to your doctor and to see if you need to get a referral to a specialist to help with that. So get treatment for medical conditions, keep up with the recommendations, and think about how the healthy behaviors that I really briefly went over today are really helpful for overall physical health. So I've probably not said, I probably have not recommended to you anything that you haven't heard before. I'm just kind of putting it together under this package of brain health. But we know that certain things are really good for health, exercise, nutrition, sleep. We all hear this. So overall, these healthy behaviors are good for overall physical health, including brain health. And so you're getting a lot of bang for your buck by doing these things because you're affecting so many different systems in your body. And I've said, a few times that when it comes to mental health, that we have this relationship with the brain and really kind of a bidirectional relationship. And so when you take care of your brain, you can lower your risk for mental health conditions. But when you treat mental health conditions that you have, that also can help to protect your brain. So it kind of goes in both directions. It's really important when it comes to mental health to think about how depending on what the situation is, therapies can be a really good option. You don't always have to go the medication route. Sometimes you need that, sometimes you don't. When it comes to therapy, some people feel like, I don't really want to go there. I want to talk to someone about, what's going on, or I don't think I really have a problem. But therapy can be really powerful, and therapy actually in and of itself can change your brain. But I wanted to just kind of mention that a lot of people will get discouraged because they'll decide, okay, I'll give therapy a try, and they go and see someone and it's not a good fit. They don't like the person, they don't feel comfortable, it's just not working for them. And then they just say, never mind, I'm not going to try therapy. And I would encourage you not to do that and actually to see therapy like you're trying to find like I don't know, like new sneakers that you might have to try on a few pairs because the first ones might not fit quite well. They might be too wide for your feet. They might be too narrow. They might just be too small overall, or you might just not like them. So then that doesn't mean you give up on sneakers. You actually go on to the next pair. And so for therapy, it's the same thing. Every therapist is so different. And so if you don't particularly click with the person that you try, does not mean that you're not going to find someone that you do like. So you want to keep giving it a try. So that's my commercial for therapy. I am a psychologist, and I very much believe in that being an important part of health when you are having some mental health concerns. Next. So I'll just end making the statement that I made before, which is that brain health is a lifelong process. And that's really important to remember that it's never too early or too late to start. So regardless of how much you've incorporated the things I've talked about today into your life, you can start now. There's never too late to get that process started. Next, and I believe that is my last slide. And I think we can open up for questions for the whole panel. Thank you.
So we'll have all the panelists turn their cameras back on so we can see everyone again, and I will group some of these questions together and pose them to the appropriate people, or people that feel like they have the answer can chime in. So there's a couple, I think, directly for Vanetta about sleep. One about asking about naps, and they said that they do most of the sleep recommendations there, but they do nap occasionally and find them to help. So why no naps? And then also, does sleep medication interfere with any of those toxin cleaning properties of sleep?
Those are great questions. So actually the nap thing is interesting because there have been a couple of studies in the last few years that do suggest that for some people, naps actually can be helpful for making up for not getting the full sleep at night. Not fully making up, but helping to somewhat make up for that lack of sleep at night. So it's not necessarily always bad. What can happen though is that if someone starts to nap a lot more, particularly an older adult, that seems to be associated with something being wrong. And so if you all of a sudden feel the need to nap all the time, that might be a signal to actually go kind of get a checkup, because that can be a signal that there's something from either a physical standpoint or a cognitive standpoint that's happening. So naps are a little complicated. Right now, if you're just napping and you're used to doing that and it's not like you feel this like need that keeps getting more intense, then that shouldn't be problematic. As far as sleep medication affecting sort of the rinsing, if you will, in the brain, I'm not aware of that being the case. So there can be downsides to sleep medication. There's pros and cons, but what's important in terms of having that time for the brain to go through that sort of rinse period is the amount of time that you're sleeping and being able to get into deep sleep. And so as long as the medication doesn't affect your ability to get to those different stages of sleep, then that shouldn't be problematic as far as I know.
Great. We have some questions here about lifestyle. So people, and maybe Tom will be the best for these, but some people have parents who lived over the age of 100 that were very active, remained very active, and others that may not have exercised their entire life and still somehow made it to 100. And there's some additional questions about, like you said, alcohol intake and smoking, and maybe former smokers that made some lifestyle changes. So just kind of speaking to the importance of lifestyle factors, but also the genetic aspect, especially as you get to the most extreme ages?
This is for sure a question for Dr. Millman. She and Dr. Barthelay at Einstein are kind of the pioneers and centenarians who have bad habits. So, Sophia, please.
Sure, thank you for that question. So I'll start by saying that for 99.99% of us, healthy habits are extraordinarily important. So we should not smoke, we should not drink excessive alcohol, we should exercise, get enough sleep, uh, maintain our mental health, right? Reduce stress, all the things that Dr. Pearls and Dr. Dotson have discussed today. For that tiny proportion of our population who have these genes that allow them to live to extreme ages, lifestyle seems to be less important because we are seeing people who may not be exercising, like you said, your family member was never exercised a day in their life, or they may be smoking, and yet somehow they seem to overcome these negative lifestyle factors and still achieve exceptional longevity, and moreover, not only longevity, but healthy longevity. And there we do think the genes play an important role in protecting people from the negative impact of the environment. So the environment may still be negative, but their genes somehow are able to combat the negativity of the environment. So those are really unique individuals. We're still trying to understand what those genes are and how they work and how they protect them. But for, like I said, 99.99% of us, lifestyle is extraordinarily important and does contribute to healthy life.
All right. We had a question about the Radco study that some people, we have participants in that study that are on the call. And they were asking about how we are identifying people with better than expected cognition. And I think Stacy's probably the best person to answer that. The criteria for Radco and just the interpretation of the cognitive, the whole everything involved.
So I'm going to make it a bit more general, not specific to that study necessarily, but we do a whole bunch of cognitive tests, as many of you know, and these tests are administered in large population-based studies throughout the United States. So we compare scores to what's called normative data or data from large groups of people to see if the scores fall within what's considered the average range or what's typical for aging. And when scores are much lower than what we expect, that tends to be someone who has cognitive impairment or something else is affecting their testing, like their hearing ability, their vision ability, if it requires seeing something. But interestingly, there are some people who do much better than what's average. And so we do have a sub-study of people who fall within the average range and this above average range because we're trying to understand what are some factors that keep people at an optimal level, their best level over time. Um, and I'm also going to ask if Vanetta has anything to add to that as a clinical neuropsychologist.
Yeah, I think you hit the important point about kind of comparing people to what's sort of typical or considered typical with other people. One thing just maybe to emphasize is that it's clear that there are different things about a person's life and their experiences and where they live that can affect their cognitive functioning as well. And that's not always going to be perfectly captured by the way that we measure things, but we do take that into account when we are, for example, doing statistical analyses for the study. And so then we try to kind of take some of those important considerations into account, we can handle that from a statistical way. And then when you see someone like in a clinical setting where they're also using these types of scores, then they take that into account in terms of their judgment of deciding whether or not something's a problem. So I just wanted to acknowledge that piece of it that people might be wondering about.
And there was actually a related question in the chat, a very interesting one saying, "Oh, I'm hearing about how you analyze the data. I'm noting tips of how I can do better next time." And I just thought that was a very interesting question because one of the things that happens is when we do testing over many years, we do the same tests all the time, and people do better on the second time because they're more relaxed. They know what the testing session is like. They kind of know what we're going to be asking them to do a little bit, and those are called practice effects. So you usually see a bump the second time someone takes tests. But what's interesting is that people who truly have cognitive impairment don't show that bump over time. They still show decline in their performance over time. So we do try to factor that into our analyses, but great question. And it's actually a reason that I showed an example of a test that we don't administer. Drawing the tree is not something that we do, so you don't need to practice that.
I'd like to chime in about one other question that I think both Vanetta and Stacy could address, and that is, what if a person does this testing and they have cognitive impairment by the testing? Are we going to tell them about that? And we are a research study. We're not acting as your clinician. And just because a person may have cognitive impairment, there could be all kinds of causes of that. And it really requires seeing a physician or a clinician to try and understand what's going on. Maybe Vanetta and Stacy, do you have further comments about that?
My little comment is, even though it seems like we do a lot of cognitive testing, it's actually not very much. And very good personalized cognitive testing would go deeper and be curated to the types of symptoms that you're experiencing. So it would be hard for us to provide a very valid interpretation of your cognitive function. We really operate on a group level. So we're trying to understand what group level changes are predictive of cognitive impairment so that we can help clinicians guide you. But the work that we're doing is really not at what we call the diagnostic level, where we can tell someone that they do or do not have cognitive impairment. But Vanetta.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. And I'll just add that if you're doing the testing for the study and you're noticing that it feels like you're struggling or you just kind of feel uncomfortable about it, then you might just want to go and make an appointment with a neuropsychologist who can do that diagnostic testing. So even though we can't share it with you, you know your own experience. And so if you feel concerned, then, there's people who can help with that.
All right. We have another question. We have Dr. Sebastiani on now. We have a question that asked, how long does it take to change your gut microbiome once you start to make some changes in your diet, and how beneficial that can be making dietary changes?
So first of all, I apologize that I had to join late, but this is a very good question for which, unfortunately, we do not have a very good answer. It's a really important scientific question to understand how fast the gut microbiome changes. And we don't have good assessment yet. It is extremely difficult to measure the rate of remodeling of the gut microbiome. So unfortunately, I'm sorry I don't have a good answer for this, but what we can tell you is a good diet has to have a good microbiome. we can confirm this.
We have a few different questions, I would say, related to genetics and familial longevity. We have someone saying that their mother outlived their siblings by 30 years. Wouldn't they expect to have similar genetics to their siblings? I know some questions about twins in families, or the number of children that a centenarian mother, or a mother who becomes a centenarian might have had. So I think that I know Dr. Pros and Dr. Anderson probably have some things to say about that, especially as it relates to the Long Life Family Study.
Well, I'll chime in about the siblings. I had mentioned in my talk that the siblings generally do have a much higher chance of getting to 100 compared to people who don't have siblings that are centenarians. But we can get what's called discordant siblings, or twins for that matter, where one person is getting to extreme old age and the other isn't. Usually the cause for that is things like environmental exposures that one had and the other didn't. For example, smoking. Now in families that's less common. Some of these habits run in families as well. But that would be at the top of my list, would be maybe one person having really good health habits that played an important role in their getting to 100, and then you have a sibling who did terrible things to themselves with bad habits. The other is, siblings share half their genes with the other sibling. And so it could be that they got dealt a different set of cards that are not conducive to getting to extreme old age, so that can happen as well. I don't know, Dr. Sebastiani is our geneticist, so if you have anything else to say about this.
No, I think you explain it very well, that you can get you can be on the 50% good chance or the 50% bad chance in terms of inheriting from your parents. And and it's also true that while the chances of siblings of centenarians to live longer are higher than the general population, they're still very small. It's still a rare phenomenon that we observe.
If I may add, another thing that may differ are exposures to things like infections, right? So these may not necessarily be a lifestyle factor, but it is an outside exposure that one person may experience and another one may not. That may also impact their lifespan.
Tom, Dr. Bros, do you have any idea the odds of a child of a centenarian becoming a centenarian themselves in terms of the statistics?
So we have, and Sophia's group has as well, and my work with Dr. Sebastiani, we've looked at a lot of pedigrees, looking at patterns of inheritance and the chances of kids themselves, kids of centenarians becoming 100 themselves. For sure, the chances are better than if you didn't have a centenarian parent. But trying to understand, does it matter if your mother was a centenarian, if your father, or for that matter, if it was your grandmother or grandfather? And also, is there a lot of clustering in the family? Were there more than one person getting to very old age? So I think there's a lot of variation that we don't understand yet. And we may, in the future, have some study, some blood studies that might be able to help predict who's going to have a greater chance of getting to 100 versus not. But I would say, for sure, it puts you at greater chance of getting to 100, but no guarantee beyond that.
But
I
if I
don't,
can add
Paula?
something, yeah, if I can add something that, and also with Sophia may want to add something. What we have seen is that um, the children of centenarians tend to be healthier than, people of their same age or born at the same time. And sometimes even their spouses. So there is something that is in addition to just the genetics. The fact that you are exposed to an environment, education, nutrition that is associated with longevity it propagates. And so there are good news for everyone. But we have seen, definitely a substantial um, we call it compression of morbidity, so postponing the onset of many aging-related diseases to older age in offspring of centenarians.
Yeah, I agree with everything that's been said. And even though we don't have a precise measure of, what are your chances of becoming a centenarian if your parent was a centenarian, the estimates we have from different studies is somewhere between 7 to 14 times higher that you will become a centenarian if your parent was a centenarian compared to someone who did not have a centenarian parent. So that's a wide range, but that's what we have from studies.
And if this is actually a kid asking what their chances are, you're already more likely, based upon the ages of our centenarian offspring, you're in your 70s or early 80s. And if you are doing fantastically well, I often say that the children are often following in the footsteps of their parents. And the parents have this history of aging very slowly, markedly delaying any disability and well into their 90s. And for those, and they may even be delaying any onset of any age-related diseases. They're on very few medications and so on. So there's this pattern of spectacular aging among the centenarians. And the question is, are you fitting that pattern? So, are you at that age in your 70s and 80s doing well without age-related diseases? People comment how you just seem younger than your age, or that yourself, and you're quite healthy for your age. Then that's a strong indicator that you should embrace that you're heading in the right direction.
There are some questions about the digital voice, digital pen data, and cognitive testing in general. So maybe Stacy, you could speak to some of those about how the increased use of computers and phones may start to be affecting people's, how they think when they are writing or drawing.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There are some studies that instead of looking, or maybe in addition to looking at how people write and draw, they're also tracking how people use their computer keyboards. So that's a really great behavioral measure of people who are using keyboards every day, or for people who are using keyboards every day. Um, in terms of the use of phones, it actually has enabled a lot of this type of research because your phone has so many sensors on it that you can actually be collecting not only voice data, but there are studies looking at where people are traveling throughout the day. And are those travel patterns changing over time? Are there geographic exploration or how far they're traveling every day, is that becoming more restricted over time? And it seems like that might also be a sign that something is changing for that person. So there's a lot of studies collecting as much digital data as they can because we don't know which metrics are important yet for determining who is on a path toward cognitive impairment and who isn't. And we're all just, really trying to figure out what those best indicators are. And then I see also here someone was asking about hearing loss and how that might affect the voice the voice biomarkers that we're trying to develop, and we're learning a lot about that. It does seem like people who have hearing impairment, the way they speak might be changing, but we're also learning a lot that I didn't know about how the vocal cords change with aging and how that affects what your voice sounds like. So it's really been eye-opening, all the different pieces that go into even just how someone is speaking. So lots to learn.
We have a question that asks about the map that Dr. Pearl showed about life expectancy. Is there any evidence that moving to a state with better life expectancy will increase your own lifespan, or at a certain age that you might move between states?
That's a great question. My gut reaction would be that there are factors associated with the state, whether it be social programs, exposure to bad things like pollution, or other stressors. There's probably not the need to move from one state to the other, but I'm guessing that there are areas within a state, for example, that are much more conducive to healthy lifestyle than other areas. If you're living in a place that has violence and poor things that would just add to your stress and so on, and so you're being exposed to chronic stress, being in a place where you don't have access to healthy foods, being in a place that has better education. Now, that's going to be more conducive to your children or your children's children, I guess. But yeah, you have to think about what are the environmental factors that we talked about that would be conducive to a person's healthy life expectancy. And if you are able to change your situation to where you have more exposure to those things, all the better. That was a long answer, but
some of those factors that we see state to state in terms of lifestyle, lifespan differences may also have a lot to do with your access to healthcare, right? So if you live in a more rural area and you have to travel an hour longer to see a physician, you're less likely to do that. So access to healthcare and having healthcare that's affordable and close to where you live probably impacts a lot of that too.
Finally, some more questions here. There was a few more questions about sleep and just different people, just based on their lifestyle and their jobs and whatnot, they are either able to get the recommended amount of sleep or they might be falling short, and they want to make sure that there's no cause for concern if they're not able to meet some of those recommendations that Vanetta pointed out.
So most people don't meet recommendations, so don't feel bad. But it's something to shoot for. So yeah, so obviously the research is showing that if consistently you're not meeting recommendations, that you could be at risk. There are studies that suggest that there are ways to try to, in some ways, make up for that lack of sleep. So, for example, there are studies that show that exercise can to some degree counteract the negative effects of lack of sleep on brain health. So, which I find kind of interesting because if you're not sleeping, it probably means you're busy, which means it's going to be hard to find time to exercise. But, it might be possible. I will say when it comes to exercise, even getting a 10-minute bout where you can is helpful. So start small if you need to, take an extra 10 minutes in the morning or during a lunch break or something like that to move. So that's one way you can try to, minimize some of the risks that come from not getting the sleep, the recommended amount of sleep. But know that you're not alone, but just try to do little things that you can to try to do other brain healthy behaviors to kind of help make up for that.
Hey,
Go ahead.
Brad,
Yep.
there was one question that I thought I could address along with Dr. Sebastiani, and that was a quite savvy person was asking about the Clotho gene, and are we studying Clotho, and what are we finding, and this has to do with our genetic studies, and Clotho got quite a bit of attention because it's associated with longer lifespan in mice, and some of the things that it does hypothetically would help with longevity, like dealing with oxygen-free radicals better and so on. But in humans, I'm going to leave it to Dr. Sebastiani to tell us about whether or not anything has been noted in humans in terms of an increased frequency of this gene in centenarians. But so far, it's much more a matter of correlation, that Clotho levels seem to be higher with people who are aging better, but that could be due to something totally that it just tracks along. Nothing causative has been noted in what Clotho does in humans.
Yeah, I can add that I actually responded to this request. I wrote to the person who asked, but we haven't seen anything different in the Clotho gene in people who reach extreme old age or not. And what does this mean? I think we have to be careful that a lot of genetic studies are still evolving because the technology is evolving, and every day we have new tools to try to really understand the genetics better. And so we might have not seen anything in the Clotho gene so far, but we might start seeing something with new technology. So I keep this open, but for now, we haven't really seen any relation in our analysis or any other. I'm not aware of any publication that has associated the Clotho genes with human longevity.
And Sophia, if somebody hears that having an ApoE4 gene that's associated with Alzheimer's, if they find out that they have that, what does that mean for them if they are American white or Asian American or Black American? Are there differences there? And I mean, how are people going to interpret the news when they hear about a gene associated with something good or bad?
So I think there's several ways to approach it, right? If you're 90 or 100 years old and you find out that you have this bad gene, I think that the impact of that bad gene is null to minimal, right? So there are people who carry these bad genes, and we know that they do, these genes that should cause disease or are associated with high risk of disease, and yet they don't get the disease. Why that happens, we don't always know. We think that there are other genes, the protective genes, that blunt the impact of these disease-causing genes. And so we're trying to learn and understand the interactions, because then people who are carriers of these bad genes potentially could still benefit from treatments that will mimic the protective genes, right, and overcome the risk. If someone is younger, we may not know what their risk is, right, whether they carry those protective genes or not. And there, I think you implement what you can about healthy lifestyle, because even if you're a carrier of these risk genes, you can still do things that will change your risk, the lifestyle factors that can still change your risk to developing these diseases.
We have another question, kind of on theme with what's trending, what's been getting publicity. the Brain HQ app for brain training and memory improvement, as it's marketed. They were wondering if you had any thoughts on that, maybe Vanetta or Stacy.
I would say you don't need to pay for something to build your brain. As Dr. Dotson was saying earlier, what is something that you've always wanted to learn? Now's the time to go do it. Learn a new language. You can get a book or even audiobooks from your local library. I'm doing it. You can learn about new topics. You can go to the community center in your town, and you'd be surprised how many enriching activities they have going on. But Vanetta.
Yeah, absolutely agree. There's things that you can do without needing to spend money. And if you are going to spend money, I would do it on something like taking a music class or something like that, or a cooking class, something that's, you can do that's really enjoyable, that's known to be good. Even things like singing, are associated with better brain health. So you can do that for free, right? And you can do it in the shower and you can drive your family crazy. So you can do things in a way that don't have to cost money. And so, yeah, I think that some of the examples that Dr. Anderson gave are really great as well.
Well, I think we're at the end of the session. Tom?
Simply, and again, I apologize to everyone about my bad cold. But I want to certainly thank our panelists and our speakers today. We are so thankful to our study participants, and doing this webinar is in part our desire to give back. And please, we've also pointed out that with the digital tests, with the food frequency form, everything we're asking of you, we are very, very careful about adding new tests and new things for people to do, because we already know it's a big study. Please know that we put a lot of thought into the things that we have asked, and that it makes a huge difference, your efforts to complete these tasks. And again, we're so thankful. I've left my name and email address and phone number there for you to contact me directly with any concerns, any issues, anything you want to share. Please contact me. I promise to give it personal attention. Okay, well, if we haven't answered a question, we will take a look at that and email you with the answer. And again, thank you so much for attending today. You all take care.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, you guys, very, very much.